All right.
Kingmaker or just plain presidential immunity? You make that call. Welcome to another episode of You Can't Make This Shit Up. Your host, David Washington. I'm Joel Hoxley. Anytime, Kellen Clark might come into our show, so I want to make sure that we let you know that he might pop in. These young people going to school and trying to juggle a job. And this is one of those absolute incredible things that happened this week, David, that everybody's talking about. So to tell the audience, the Supreme Court's decision in the Trump immunity case, it addresses whether a former president has immunity from criminal prosecution for actions taken during their tenure. The majority opinion introduced a new hybrid model of presidential accountability, where immunity depends on the classification of the criminal conduct for core constitutional powers. The former president is entitled to absolute immunity for actions within the outer perimeter of official responsibilities. There is a presumptive immunity. The case, how do we say this, David? The case is it's vacated and remanded, which, for those that don't know, that for further proceedings consistent with the new framework. So what that means is it goes back to the lower court, because now that they've defined this immunity, now it's up to the court to see how it applies. Now, Justice Thomas concurs, emphasizing the constitutional protections of presidential actions, while Justice Jackson dissents, highlighting the potential erosion of the rule of law by granting such immunity. But I think the one thing that everybody on the liberal side is really focusing on right now is Sotomayor, Judge Sotomayor, because she, right at the end of her statement, says you've just made, you've created a king.
Right. The end of democracy as we know it. And Kellen's with us, so let's add Kellen to the stage here. And
do we have to?
Yes, we have to. Okay.
Welcome, Kellen. Welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. You have already been introduced. Don't think that I had not anticipated your arrival.
All right.
Kellen Clark is busy working, so he's come to us remote. We've just introduced the case, so
yeah, I just saw the past couple minutes of it. Yeah, I've seen this very doomsday narrative online, even though the reality is, when it comes to Donald Trump himself, nothing has been decided yet, right? Like, they haven't actually ruled on Trump's immunity. This doesn't actually mean that he's going to be tried or not tried. We don't fully know yet. All we know now is what instructions the lower court is going to use for the immunity. And I think, as far as Sotomayor's opinion goes, if he had absolute immunity for the outer ring of his actions, then I think what she was saying would be true. But given that it's presumptive immunity, and Roberts even provides a couple cases in which the immunity can be averaged, I'm not convinced that it's doomsday.
Well, the Democrats are going as far as saying that one Democrat, a congresswoman, said that was on the January 6th committee, and feels that he will go after them if elected president. But she says this means that the president could actually be immune if he sends SEAL Team 6 in to take out the conservative justices. So if Biden wants to take out all 6 conservative justices, he would be immune from prosecution because it would be an official act.
Exactly. Roberts create these zones for immunity, and it's, I had to, take out my pocket constitution and look at the, what was it, Article 2 Section 3, and read what the take care clause says about presidential actions. And there, Kelly's got his pocket constitution, and I'm reading, I'm looking at other abstracts, I'm seeing what the Federalist Papers say, and I'm just as confused as, I'm not as confused. I get it. I'm close to understanding Chief Justice Roberts' rationale, and I'm thinking, okay, we're we're okay. Democracy is okay. However, you have these extreme examples of what a president a president could do, and
In the
not
dissents, a lot of those
right,
hypotheticals are in the
right,
dissents,
right,
so
Yeah.
they're not actually
and they're putting it in their
Confirmed.
framework of Trump. And say, wait a second, Trump's not even president. Biden is president right now. What makes you think that Biden won't do something
Listen, Biden's already been
just
using this
as
immunity as far as the Trump campaign is concerned,
exactly,
because
exactly,
they believe that he's sending the DOJ up to, that using him as a tool against him. So look, I'm with you when you start to say, well, who does this benefit right now? It benefits him more than it benefits Trump,
exactly.
but it's the fear factor that everybody's trying to create.
Mhm.
All those hypotheticals come from the dissent, but you can't, in the military, you can be tried by the UCMJ
Mhm.
if you act on orders that are not lawful. So the assassination of the Supreme Court, as this Congresswoman said, would be an unlawful act. The president, okay, if he's immune because it's an official act,
But the SEAL Team 6 wouldn't.
the SEAL Team 6 is not going to do it. And if they
They're
do it,
smart, they wouldn't do it.
they're not,
They're not
they're not
immune.
immune. So
Exactly.
why would they do it? I mean,
Right.
come
Yeah.
on, there's
And,
got to be some common sense to this. But
Right.
yes, I get the hyper partisan freaking out right now.
Knee-jerk reactions, and that's why I'm glad that we're doing this now and let the dust settle a little bit, and get a little bit more educated on the issue. And again, first reference I went to was the Constitution,
Mhm.
and did a little bit more research on the take care clause.
Yeah.
And so it helped me better understand where Chief Justice Roberts was coming from, and I see the rationale. To involve the courts even more is the frustrating part, because again,
Yeah.
a president could say, I'm doing X, Y, and Z in my official capacity as the president, and it may look scandalous or possibly illegal or even immoral. It, it boils down to meeting that particular criteria for whether or not it's in the scope of the official powers of the president or on the peripheral. That
Mhm.
peripheral part is just like, it's just
The-
wild, and the court will have to decide that.
yeah.
Well, Kellen,
Yeah. So two things. I mean, one, what is an official act? Again, would be informed by the Constitution and or powers that Congress would delegate to the executive branch. Those things are the official capacity. Things like campaigning are not necessarily the official capacity. That's that nebulous outer ring area. And yeah, I mean, it's a little frustrating to get even more cases
well,
into these courts potentially. But
didn't you point out? Didn't you point out? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but didn't you
yeah,
point out that, or one of you, when we were talking about this, pointed out that dual powers that the president and
yeah,
Congress have aren't immune.
yes,
Right.
that's correct.
Kellen.
Yeah, so if they have concurrent, if the president has concurrent power with Congress and he acts without the authority of Congress and or goes against Congress in an area that Congress's word matters, the president is not immune to that. So that is still a pretty strong area where the president is weak. And I think earlier Joel used the term common sense. We got to treat this case with common sense. A lot of cases set up framework. Somebody takes it to the absolute extreme. They go to court and they're struck down anyways. Because a lot of times justices make their opinions with common sense in mind. There's always exceptions. Usually when people tend to push to the absolute extreme of what the rule may or may not allow, usually that means an exception is written into the rule. If SEAL Team 6 were sent in to shoot, a couple of justices, I would suggest that even the liberal justices would go against Biden doing that, because of course they wouldn't want to get shot.
Isn't that thing called impeachment?
That's what I went back to, while we were debating. And
you remember when I told AO, didn't I tell AOC if she had a problem with if she had a TikTok, I told her, hey, if she has a problem with that, why doesn't she impeach the justices? What's she doing right now? She's
going after Thomas.
She's submitting articles of impeachment.
Right.
But instead of her blowing media stuff on social media, she has a tool. Why doesn't she use it? I don't care that she's using it. I go for it.
Right.
She's not going to get anywhere with it.
Right.
Probably not.
One of my frustration, gentlemen, is the fact that the Supreme Court is supposed to provide clarity to the law. And I'm going back to this, little zone that Roberts has created, the immunity for the presumptive immunity for official acts, and on the peripheral. And I'm thinking this is where a lot of the concern is. And any issue will go right back to the courts for the courts to figure this out. And I just think it just muddies the process that much more.
Well, I think when you read Thomas's decision, he's very clear that nothing like this has ever come up.
That's true.
Nothing like this has ever come up. So, even when you talk about, they love to talk about Nixon when he said,
right, Watergate.
When he said, if the president did it, it's not illegal. That whole context is totally different than what we're talking about here. We're talking about what evidence would have been provided in that case. But was it a private act, or was it an act in the official capacity? As Kellen pointed out, it technically was an act in politics, which is separate from the office. So Watergate would have been sending people in politically. So some of the evidence may have been suppressed, but he would have ultimately, the tapes would have ultimately still been available.
It would have been possible to prosecute him, probably.
Okay, but was he on the verge of being impeached?
Yes.
If he hadn't resigned.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, he would have been.
The
impeachment was still on the table. We're talking about, whether when he resigned, whether they could still go after him.
Right.
That this never had come up to the court because they never had to go, because Ford pardoned him.
Right.
So this would not have been a question. So you look at the fact that, President Bill Clinton would be the closest next person. What civilly, or how much of that was in an official act when he was having that affair in the Oval Office?
I thought it was the other issue that he lied.
That it was perjury. But could you have proved perjury? Could you have proved perjury without, through this official act thing?
I see, and that's where it gets.
But again, it didn't go there. He got impeached. He got impeached for that.
Right.
So it went through the right process. So of course the Supreme Court didn't have to see that. So people are looking at this the wrong way. If these liberal states with their hyper political focus on Trump, and I'm going to say it that way because I want to be clear, I'm not taking my conservative side or my moderate or liberal side, I think it, to me, this is super focused on Trump. Nobody else would be, no matter who they were, nobody would going after, hiding, a line item on a prostitute, and whether you paid a lawyer fee or not. Nobody would be doing that if it weren't Donald Trump. And unfortunately, that's why the Supreme Court has this case.
Mhm.
And why is this, in front of the Supreme Court? And now you're saying that they're taking care of Donald Trump. They're not taking care of Donald Trump. They're taking
They
care of the
have-
presidency of the United States.
Right.
Biden, who is in the office and could be literally doing something, we don't know, could literally be going and using the DOJ after Donald Trump.
Right.
They're protecting him. So when he leaves the office,
He's immune.
I mean, he's immune. So he's saying one thing, but this protects him more than it protects Trump.
Exactly.
Right
And
Right
Kellen,
now.
Joel, I have a hypothesis to pose to two of you and see
Okay.
how you answer this. In the executive powers of the president is able to give pardons. Let's say he was given a bribe to pardon a certain individual. In his role as the executive, the commander in chief, et cetera, he pardons that particular person and receives the bribe to do so. Is he protected under this framework that Roberts created?
So if the president, obviously the president could pardon himself for the taking of the bribe, and he would be fine, anyways. So he probably wouldn't even need to use this court case. But if hypothetically he didn't absolve himself of that, I think the case is not entirely clear on that. I think it would have been wise for Roberts to directly address bribery. My guess, though, is that since bribery is a crime in office, for Congress and for every other executive, and for them, it's not considered part of the office. It's considered a crime separate from it. My guess would be that the president, my guess, going off of Robert's opinion, is that the president would probably not be immune. But of course, that would be up to the judgment of the courts. And if there is one issue I have with the case, I think generally this case has been overblown to mean a bunch of things it isn't. If there's a problem I do have with the case, though, it's that I think it does leave, with how much room you leave open for judicial interpretation, with how politicized the courts have become, that could lead to inconsistent ruling of the case, but we'll ultimately have to see whether or not that happens. That's only bad if it actually happens.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but this is the way I look at it, David. The way it reads, the actual bribe would not be in the capacity of his official act. The official act being
Clemency.
the pardon would not be admissible in the court. That official act would not be admissible in the court. But the actual money being paid. So would it be more difficult to prove it? Yes. Would it be would it so it's that's the gray line. The bribery itself, yes.
Mhm.
Charged, go ahead. But the proving it makes it so much more difficult because the official act cannot be. When were the documents presented to him? Before or after the bribe was taken? All of the legwork to get there now becomes more difficult because that's all immune.
Yeah. I think I saw one constitutional scholar, or was it a lawyer or something, who said that in order to prove bribery in this country, you need to notarize signatures that the transaction happened. It's pretty
Well,
challenging.
you tell that to the commissioner that decided to take the money off her desk. I mean,
That's a good point.
Orange
That's
County has a very
yes.
recent case of bribery that
Yep.
we can reference. So
And see, this is where, and thank goodness I am not an attorney or a constitutional lawyer, because this just murkies up the whole playing field for me at least. Again, my understanding growing up and understanding the Constitution and the three branches of government, that for the Supreme Court, the third branch, they are to offer some clarity to the laws that are passed and signed into law by the president. And for something like taking a bribe to pardon someone, the pardon is um, very clear in, I think, Section 2 or Section 1 of the Article 2. It's
Two.
very clear that the pardoning, a pardon is one of the uh, executive duties of the
Yeah.
presidency. And so I would think automatically, I would think, and, I'm putting on my, Justice Thomas robe here and say, hey, the president, he or she is immune.
Well, technically, aren't they immune? Don't they do it every day?
Right.
I mean, did not Bill Clinton put some people's immunity that we were like absolutely? They wait to pardon people
Mm-hmm.
right there to the very last minute because they don't want any of those monetary, deals to come out. I
Right.
mean, there are people dealing.
Yes.
Lawyers are making buku
Yes.
money, right? That buku money they're making is going into political contributions and everything. Listen, that is the muddiest thing. So, David, for you to think about it, it's like it's already happening,
Exactly.
and nobody's going
Right.
after it because
Nobody's ever successfully challenged a president for a pardon. There was an attempt to challenge Ford for his pardon of Nixon. The courts said they're going nowhere. There was once an attempt to go after a pardon that was put up, I believe, by Calvin Coolidge. That didn't go anywhere. Basically, all previous challenges to pardons have never gone anywhere. So it's never really been a crime to pardon people since they have the Constitution behind them. So
Exactly.
what are you going to do about it?
and it's an official act. So guess
Yeah,
what?
it
Doesn't matter how you
very
get
much
that
an
pardon
official
up
act.
there.
Very
I
much
always
an
thought that
official act.
everything the president does is an official act. If the president decides to jaywalk, it's an official act of the presidency. If the president
God
decides
bless
to have dinner with the king of Russia, it's a
Well, if he decides to go buy a Valentine's gift for his wife
right.
on Valentine's Day and wants it to be a surprise, that's that can't be an official act because we all know what she got. And she does too.
Like I said,
You can't hide anything when you're the president of the United
we're
States.
political innovators during the day and constitutional lawyers and scholars in our free time
And we'll
here.
leave the comedy to the real comics because I mean I'm just having a fun time with this because I think that the court did try to put clarity
Right.
so that when it goes back to the court, they can look at it and they can make those determinations.
Right.
And when it gets appealed, the clarity will come even more because it always have to be continuously being defined now that we have the courts going after former presidents.
One last question I have for the two of you: will you be watching the Judge Chuckins case now that this has been remanded to her court? This particular matter in regards to Trump's immunity and so forth and so on.
I think you have to. I mean, it's if you want to know and you want to be informed on it and you want to understand what's going on, I think you have to. But what I'm watching right now is where the media is, which I think is ridiculous, is the fact that instead of Thursday, the charges or the sentencing coming out, we've postponed the sentence to September 18th. So the court can review this and give the opportunity for Trump's lawyers to file. But he set a solid date, September 18th. Think about it. September 18th, ballots are on their way out.
Hands.
So
yeah.
Guess what? If you're putting Trump in jail, if you decide to put Trump in jail, or you decide to put him on probation, or you decide to do anything, it's at voting time. Wow. I mean, you can't have the media's talking about, it's a delayed, but you're giving ballots while this guy's giving a sentence. That's very impactful on the election. And
Yeah.
for Hillary Clinton to say that, well, the FBI basically gave Trump the upper hand when he came out with his decision when he was speaking about the cell phone.
Okay. All right.
So I mean, all these things become very political. Now this case has become even more political because we don't need an October surprise. We got a September surprise.
Yeah, we got it right now. Yes. Kellen, what about you? Will you be watching the proceedings now that this case is remanded to
Well,
Judge
well,
Chuckin?
well, absolutely, of course. Like Joel said, I mean, the timing of it is still relevant. You know, a lot of his criminal proceedings are not scheduled until after the election, so they'll go through if he loses. Um, but this one will very likely still go through before the election. Now, granted, he'll appeal it to the upper court. I don't think the Supreme Court will take it, given that they've already sent it back to the court. I don't think they want to take it because they're already AOC's already after them. I think they already think they're on thin ice, so I don't think they want to take the case. But whatever that initial ruling will still hold a lot of weight to voters, regardless. It'll still hold a lot of weight to voters. You got to be watching it. And as far as like Joel's mentioning, like they try to bring clarity when we listen to the oral arguments for this immunity case. Both sides, including the side that was with the DOJ, knew that there was some kind of immunity. And because Gorsuch and Roberts both asked them this at some point, you know, so you think there's some kind of immunity, some level qualified immunity. They're like, yeah, on some level the president is protected. And actually both sides of the aisle were in agreement of that. They just disagreed on where the boundaries of that were. So there was always, they say like so many of the media people, they like to say that we have granted, this brand new power, but even if it was never spelled out, it was never explicitly said, it was implicitly understood by the constitutional lawyers of the world. All we have now is more official notes on it. Now it's actually said. Now we actually have some boundaries drawn to it, because before it was this nebulous concept that they all had, but they all had it different. So I think it was important ultimately, given our current circumstances, and potentially if these circumstances happen in the future, that we have some of our lines drawn.
Well, I've always hated the line, "The president's not above the law." Well,
Sometimes
I've
he
always
is.
said, that can't be true, because he can basically take troops and send them overseas and start a police action without Congress creating a war, right? They give him the power to do that. And as far as I know, murder is an offense. Look, I'm being over the top, but listen, he is above the law. That's why you have a law called impeachment.
Mm-hmm.
And if the impeachment happens and then it goes to conviction, and eventually we may have a president that goes beyond, the political impeachments and actually break the law and be impeached and convicted. It may eventually happen. But right now, the hyper political part of it is we have to balance a Senate, and it makes it very difficult to get the impeachment that people are seeking.
So, gentlemen, does this not move us closer to that imperial presidency that was discussed during Nixon's administration?
Listen, David, you have to worry about. I think I've been clear on this. I'm not a fan. I've always been a fan of the Heritage Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Always have.
Sure.
Started with Ronald Reagan, great, and they were a great think tank. But what they've produced in this Project 2025 totally baffles me, with my love of history and what I try to produce in the balance. There was never a moment when you read the Federalist Papers and you do all this stuff, and there was never a opportunity where we thought that the power should be greater for the president over the other two branches. So anything that leads us closer to Project 2025 is a fearful thing. And that, I think, is where the emphasis of Soyota Mayer kind of gets why she said that, is because Heritage Foundation Project 2025 is a kingmaker.
Sure.
If you read it, you see it.
I want to.
It really is a kingmaker, and I'm not ready to go down that rabbit hole. And I would hope that Heritage Foundation can create clarity or pull back on some of that, because
it's excessive.
There should be nobody with more power in our three branches of government. And yes, look at the power that has just been wielded by the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. If Congress does their job, if Congress makes good law, if Congress starts actually taking the purse strings and controlling them, and not allowing the president to bribe through, use bribery through our system of student loans, and would actually hold everything in check, we could get back to the three powers of government doing their job and being separate. Look, AOC, enjoy your impeachment process. You finally figured out how to do your job. Congress, do your job. President, stop all of these frivolous presidential orders that lead to making law. Come on. Once we start doing our job, we wouldn't be having half of our conversations. We'd be able to focus on what's going on here locally like we'd like to.
True. Kelly, your thoughts on the period?
So I think what Joel said about Project 2025 is spot on. I think it's an excessive reorganization of our government in a way that kind of goes against a lot of its mission, a lot of the vision of the framers. Do I think this ruling brings us closer? I actually don't think so, simply because, again, the lawyers on both sides of the oral arguments knew there was some level of immunity. If this was always there in the background, it's better to get the skeleton out of the closet, is the way I see it. It's better to get the skeleton out of the closet, because part of this was always there. And again, like, had it applied to all acts while they're president, I would say it would be. But given unofficial acts don't have any immunity, acts that have concurrent powers with Congress and without the approval of Congress are not immune, period.
Right.
And a lot of those peripheral moves can still be challenged. I personally don't think so. I mean, the president has always been above the law in certain cases and not above them in others. And I think this, weirdly enough, kind of fits with that tradition. I don't think that we'll encounter a president like Donald Trump in the near future or the far future that has all these issues with criminal prosecutions, because we haven't before. Generally, I mean, we've obviously had some real scandals in office. Nixon, of course, being the second closest to what we have now. But I don't realistically see how many times we're going to find ourselves in the situation that we are now. I don't realistically see that many cases where this ruling is a big impact.
Well, let's think about it for a second, David, because as I'm listening to Kellen make a very good point, you're making very good points.
Thank you. You too.
We had to have had immunity from prosecution for our president, because Truman dropped 2 atomic bombs on a country, killing millions.
Civilians.
And if he didn't, civilians. And to think that our president could leave office and be charged in a crime for doing his job, that goes to your point. We've always known there's some immunity there. So no, I think we're overthinking the details because we've had to put so much. The Supreme Court has had to put so much into making an outline of what kinds of immunity there are.
And he was acting in his role as commander in chief. So that is an official role of the
Right.
president.
Right. No, I agree, but I'm saying we've always known there's some type of immunity.
There's always been some level, but this video can't go on for too long. So I'll just wrap up by saying, if AOC really wants to go after these justices, she should have done it when the news about Thomas's vacations came out, not in response to rulings like this. When you do it in response to the rulings rather than the crimes,
That's a whole different show.
yeah, then it's all about the political aspect, and we have too much politics in our court as it is. I'm glad the Supreme Court didn't actually go ahead and decide on Donald Trump and sent it back. I think that was the smart move on their end, and I think it's the right move in general to just give instructions to lower courts instead. I think that was the right way to do it.
My final word: the Roberts Court rules. I have always been impressed with this court. I'm sure that Democrats don't like it because it leans conservative, but I think Roberts is probably will go down as one of the best Chief Justices.
We'll see.
We'll see about that. However, I'm still coming to terms and trying to understand Roberts' majority consent. And it is making sense. Again, the first thing that I turn to is the Constitution and understanding the Constitution. And we encourage our fellow Americans to do the same and understanding this better. Besides the talking heads like us, the pundits, educate yourselves, do your own damn research. And this term has been an education. This Supreme Court term has been an education, and not just the judiciary, but also in the Constitution. I think we all can agree to that.
Yeah.
So we're your political innovators. This is what we do best. We get into the weeds of the Constitution. And speaking of the Constitution, check out the Morning Constitution with our host here, Joel Hawksley. He gives you a in-depth perspective of the Constitution. It's very educational and knowledgeable. And of course, you have the David Washington Show.
You got to watch the David Washington Show if you want to get anywhere and you have any idea of what you can do better as a organization. If you're a liberal and you really want to know what's right and wrong with your party at this moment, David's trying to cover that. But most of all, if you're thinking about getting into politics, if you're really thinking about moving forward and you want just to understand it, there's Countertop Politics every Monday. It's short, it's sweet, and to the point, and you will get an enormous amount of free information there. And let me tell you, when you get that information, you'll know that being political innovators and working with David Washington, JM Washington Network is where you want to be. We got the Leadership Academy coming out. Yes. That's the next thing. If you really want to, next year, you can be learning and getting prepared for your trip for service to our country, to our cities, and to our county. So this is the Morning Constitution. This is you can't make this shit up. We have this is the flagship. Please like, share, just subscribe, get it, and be part of it. Not your feelings, got to be facts.
That's Kellen Clark, Joel Hawksley, and I'm David Washington. We're your political innovators here at the JM Washington Network. We'll see you the next time.